for most people, they can always go back home and you can always go back to what is known and comfortable for you. But again, did you immigrate for the known and comfortable, or did you immigrate for a new experience to challenge yourself, to try something new?
Hello, and welcome back to Off to the Valley, the podcast where we explore the journeys of entrepreneurs reshaping industries worldwide. I'm your host, Pratik Panda, and today we are thrilled to be joined by Nino Melikidze, the co founder and CEO of Immitracker. Nino is a Georgian immigrant and entrepreneur now based in Toronto. She's passionate about helping immigrants succeed, particularly in Canada and Australia. With a background in tech and project management, she previously founded VisaWire, an immigration service marketplace that later merged into Immitracker. Nino is also the host of My Immigrant Story, a podcast quite similar to this one, which is focused on immigrant entrepreneurs and professionals. Nino, it's a pleasure to have you on the show and welcome to Off to the Valley.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Let's get to know you a little bit better. You're originally from Georgia, but you've been traveling quite a bit around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and where you've been?
Yeah, long story, but I'll try to summarize it. So you're right, originally from Tbilisi, Georgia, born and raised there. And at the age of 17, I left to do my undergrad in the US in a university called Worcester Polytechnic Institute, which is 1 hour out of Boston. Finished my undergrad in information systems there, moved to Boston for a full-time job. It was very common for students that went to universities in New England. Most of us tried to get jobs like in that area, particularly any big city we could find around there. And after a year of living in Boston, had to deal with some H-1B challenges, which I'm sure you audience is very familiar with. And after now being able to secure my H-1B off of one try at the lottery, though my company sponsored me, I got subsequently relocated to Bogota, Colombia. And after that, the same company relocated me to Vancouver, Canada, which is how I ended up in Canada in the first place. And then after another year of working with them, I ended up moving to Toronto around 2019 to kind of pursue my entrepreneurial passions and become self-employed and build products.
That's amazing. So you've had your share of challenges. My guess is that's what led you to Immitracker. Can you tell me a little bit more about the problem you were facing? Looks like your company got you to Canada. What encouraged you to start a company and then go solve this for other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been passionate about building things for a very long time. I always wanted to do something on my own. I remember when I was back in Colombia, I started writing blog posts about my takeaways of working in a corporate environment, especially as somebody that got relocated several times and had to deal with different cultures. And then while I was there, I actually ended up with a problem, which was because I kept moving so much, it was really difficult for me to meet new people in a very short period of time. So that's actually what got me into entrepreneurship in the first place. I was trying to build an app and a community to connect people based on similar interests. That was my very first startup that I started back in 2018. It was called Delphi. I shut that down later on, but I had a very funny full circle moment with Immitracker because an earlier version of Immitracker, when it was only known as My Immitracker, that platform is something I used for my own Canadian immigration journey. And then when we started this company back in 2022, we actually acquired some of that technology to build the current company we have now. So I came full circle. That started in 2018 with something completely different. I was using that platform for my own integration and then came to this in 2022.
Yeah, my Immitracker is also quite popular. I moved to Canada. I used to check their forums and community a
It's
lot.
the same thing.
Yeah,
It's the
that's
same thing.
awesome.
We just rebuilt it into a different company now.
That's amazing. So tell me a little bit more, right? You were in the Boston area, you moved to Bogota, you came to Vancouver, now Toronto. What have you noticed, at least culturally or ecosystem wise, and how have these places been different? And also how that's influenced you to become a more holistic entrepreneur?
Well, each one of these places have very different work cultures, right? So, I mean, in the US, everything is very straightforward. Like everybody's hustling, people want to move up the career ladder, people are not afraid to have the difficult conversations, whether it's like a salary conversation or promotion or like getting into a role. Like it's really about the go-getter attitude. Like I remember the very first week I walked into the training in my old company, like there was just this like person doing a sales training, and there's just curse words all over the place that look like madmen. And I was like, oh my God, where am I? But it was normal. Like people are just way more direct and way more open to going after what they want. You move to something like Colombia, that is not the approach at all. Work is work. Work stays at work. We do not take work outside of the office, which, as you know, in the correct is not the case. People frequently bring their work home. A lot is done through these interpersonal connections. You're supposed to build up relationships unless you have certain statuses attached to you and follow certain bureaucratic systems. People don't take you seriously. So that was a stark contrast to what I was used to dealing with in the US, because even as a 22-year-old, you can get taken seriously in the US. If you're like in the right position, you're showing the right attitude. Not the case in Colombia, because they expect to be looking at something with a little bit more tenure, with a little bit more certification or like formal background. Then you come to Canada, which was an interesting switch for me because I expected Canada to be just like the US. And it wasn't. In fact, there are certain things that are similar, definitely more focused on work here, but it's m- more kind of informal environment in the sense that people don't actually tell you what they think. It's not as open about like saying what you want or what you feel or what you're going after. People kind of dance around subjects a lot more here. And that's definitely a challenge that I faced when I first moved to Vancouver. I had to work in Calgary as well. And Toronto's finally the middle ground that I found between like the Canadian culture and the American work culture. Here, people do a little bit of both, which has been a more comfortable adjustment for me compared to everything else I've seen.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about Immitracker, right?
Yeah.
In a nutshell, tell our audience what is it, and you've called it the ways of
Yeah.
immigration. So tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so Immitracker, the ways of immigration, the reason we called it that because, as you know, the way that crowdsources information from drivers to help them figure out what's the most optimal route for their way home and what are the kind of challenges that they can face along the way. Immigration in a nutshell is very similar, right? Like, I mean, you went through it, so you know that yes, there is a process. Yes, there's a high level estimate of what you have to go through and how long it's going to take. But the reality that you experience is frequently very different. And then people come across different challenges, requests from the government, unreasonable rejection, delays that you only become aware of when you talk to others and understand, like, oh, these five people went through this. I might expect to go through this as well. It's not written anywhere. And that's what made Tracker such an appealing company for me to build, because you basically, these people are taking valuable time out of their day to provide their information anonymously to support others. And the community we've built around this is beautiful. We have over 8,500 people on WhatsApp right now, and these groups are active every single day. Every day, people share insights about what they went through, how they're navigating it. And you can see this like moral support system that helps them kind of get through this challenge. Because let's be real, immigration is one of the most challenging things a person is going to do in their lifetime. Because if it was super easy, everybody would be doing it, right?
Yeah. So on that note, right, the Canadian immigration system is obviously under a lot of pressure. When I say pressure, there has been a significant amount of pressure from citizens on whether the immigration system is right or not and how many immigrants to let in, all
Yeah.
of that, right? And it's been in the news for a while with the recent election. It's been thrown out a lot more.
Is it?
Now, I'm going to ask you a question that is probably relevant for two different audiences. One
Okay.
is founders, the other is also people who want to move to Canada for, let's say, a job. What would you tell these two groups, which is probably, in your opinion, the best way to come to Canada? Like, why should founders come to Canada? And what's the best way for them to get here? Two is for people who are seeking jobs. What is the best way to come to Canada?
Great question. So for founders, I think let's unpack this. So there's a lot of conversation going on in the Canadian tech space and the startup space about Canada being a difficult place to build, and like its fundraising is harder than in the US. And there are certain elements of truth to this rhetoric. Like there are certain things that are hard, and it is much harder to fundraise here. And there's like a little bit more bureaucracy. Things are a little bit slower than you would find in the US. That being said, Canada is still ahead of most of the world when it comes to these things. And just the sheer amount of talented people that you meet here that are as ambitious and as driven as you, especially actually immigrants. There are so many immigrants that I meet that are in the startup space that are either working for startups or building their own companies because they have this ambition to build themselves and something of their own in another country is actually crazy. And this density of people that I've met, specifically in Toronto, when it comes to startup space, the talented, motivated, creative people that are building incredible things is rather high. Later on, if you want to continue building somewhere else, that's entirely up to you. But I think it's a wonderful place to get started, to kind of like dip your feet in the water and like move forward and like start working on your dream. And also, you do have the Canadian market to work with. There are benefits from the government that you can get. And also, you have very close proximity to the US market as well. And you see a lot of Canadian startups building in Canada, selling in the US, and cutting a lot of costs when it comes to like very same like money that they need to be paying in salaries or like just the difference when it comes to the USD and CAD. So there's ways to work with it. And I do think Canada is an incredible place to build because of that, because the people that you meet and the environment you have is just significantly better for building that you're going to get in most of the world. When it comes to regular immigrants, they're coming to Canada. One thing I would say, and this is actually one of the reasons why I started VisaWire, and it's very important to understand where do you fit into the ecosystem of the country that you're moving to. And I think a lot of issues that immigrants face is that they think of immigration as I am going to a destination, I'm getting there, I am there. And once I'm there, things get figured out. And I'm sure you've also heard this from friends of family members that have immigrated. Oh, they went there. And once they went there, everything got figured out. But no, the hardest thing isn't even the paperwork. The hardest thing is figuring it out. And it's funny. Actually, I've noticed this funny thing that for the people that the hardest thing is the paperwork, the easier thing is figuring out the rest. And for the people that the easier part was the paperwork, the harder thing was figuring out the rest.
Mhm.
I've seen this, but nobody gets both done equally well, ever. And I've seen this issue come up even in our communities that people get their paperwork, they come to Canada, they want to get settled, and then they realize that the jobs that they came here for are not really here, or they didn't research if the jobs are available, or they realize it's really hard to get the job because people expect Canadian work experience, certain qualifications, or they don't want to work a few levels down because I was a VP or I was a director back home and I don't want to be starting from scratch. And that's why you have a lot of these issues of people complaining about them not being able to get jobs because it's hard to break in initially.
You mentioned a little bit about VisaWire, and I want to sort of touch upon that. What was different about VisaWire? You decided to merge it into ImmiTracker. What was that whole pivotal moment that led to that shift?
So Resawar was my initial attempt at breaking into the immigration industry, along with the My Immigrant Story podcast that I used to host for a few years. So I was very passionate about immigration. It played a very big role in my own story. And I wanted to find a way to fix this space because, as you know, it's a rather complicated, difficult space that's riddled with older school players that don't really actually help the people going through the process. So VisaWire was started with the intention that I wanted to build a marketplace of employment services that would help immigrants secure jobs starting in Canada and then other places. The reason why VisaWire ultimately got shut down and the marketplace model got put on ImmiTracker is because it's hard to fix a problem as a startup when the problem is a part of the foundational structure, like of the country itself. Like I can try to list all the employment service providers that can hire an immigrant on my platform, but I can't change the culture of employers being less willing to hire new immigrants. I can't put jobs on there that people are not hiring for. And I can't like put services that actually help you transition into becoming employable in Canada if they don't exist. And yes, there's settlement agencies provided by the government, but if they were doing a good job, you wouldn't be having this issue work and like talent mismatch, right? You have the talented immigrants that are not settling. So I realized it's a structural issue. And I realized that partially is because of the government bringing in a certain percentage of immigrants that just did not fit the economic and labor demands. And as a result, those people couldn't find a job, or the system itself of hiring immigrants was very broken. And I can't go ahead and fix every employer in the country. So that's why we switched to a marketplace of services that would be relevant to immigrants, so financial services, immigration services, so forth. And we merged that into ImmiTracker and pursued a different venture.
What are some things you learned in the previous journey that you are sort of carrying forward in the ImmiTracker journey as well?
From my previous startups, like
Yeah.
VisaWire and my very first one, well, one is that you have to be okay with failing. Like that's a very big one. And I think that's a hard one for a lot of startup founders because it takes a certain mindset. to undertake this and repeatedly being told no, or this is wrong, or this is not going any over and over again, it does become very mentally taxing. And being able to wake up every single morning, look at yourself in the mirror and say, I am still passionate about this. I still want to do this. I will find a way to make it work, or I have the strength to stop this because I know it's not going anywhere. And like facing the consequences of it is very, very hard. And this is something that I've been grappling for years. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for the business and you have to do what's best for you. And your emotions about how all of this makes you feel and how these rejections or the business not working out make you feel don't matter. You have to face the truth. So that was one thing that I learned. Another thing I learned, that ideas don't mean anything. Ideas are a dime a dozen. You can have 1,000 wonderful ideas, but it all comes down to the execution, right? And if you don't know how to execute, or you can't execute, or if you're executing in the wrong place at the wrong time, which is a very valid point, and it's just not going, you have to confront those realities and know when to cut your losses. So, Jen, I see this a lot. You probably see this with founders as well. They're like, oh, I have all these amazing ideas. Who's
Yeah.
working on them? Is it going to be you? And if it is you, do you have a plan on how you're going to do this? And have 90% of the time, no, 99% of the time, those ideas don't go anywhere, because a good idea means nothing without execution. So I think those are the two main takeaways. And the third one I would say is choose your market very carefully. Understand the importance of the right market at the right time. And yes, you could be passionate about something, but really have to be like, really look into this. Does this market have potential? Yes, be passionate, but you also need to look at the longer term trajectory. And I think a lot of people build for their dream, but they don't really look at, is this the right place to be building right now?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because as founders, we tend to get very emotionally attached to our ideas as well. You said one thing about market signals, right? And knowing whether you're in the right market at the right time. In your
Mhm.
experience, have you been able to figure out a way to get these signals quickly?
I don't know if there's a way of getting these signals quickly aside from, well, NFX has a few good articles about this. And one thing they say is like you have to look at the window for a certain market segment. Like, for example, they would say early 2000s was the window for building consumer apps because that's when there was the highest demand. So if you're building a consumer app right now and you're trying to compete with an Uber or a Lyft, it's much harder for you to get into that window than it was, let's say, 10 years ago, right? So being cognizant of the very obvious like windows is the first thing you need to do. For example, immigration. Immigration, I do think the window is open because it's just such an old school industry. Immigration just has different issues because it's an old school industry. The adoption rate and the barrier to break in is very high. So that's what makes it difficult here. But I don't think the window is closed here. But then if you're trying to compete with your Facebooks of the world, good luck. Like that window, that one market is a little bit oversaturated. So you can go about it that way. And the other option on top of already considering all of it is just start building. Like you want to build an AI, let's say, right? Everybody and their mother is building an AI right now. So segment on further. Yes, you want to do AI, but what portion of the market hasn't been tapped with AI tools yet? Like if you're trying to build yet another AI productivity tool, how many are there right now? You probably know more than me. There's like hundreds at this point, thousands. But what about applying AI to older school industries, like going into mining or steel or something like that? Probably hasn't been done as much, but you can still build an AI, just building a thing that isn't oversaturated. You can do your research, and the rest is all about execution and seeing where your product takes you.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Nino. You mentioned a little bit, in one of your responses, you've built a WhatsApp community of over 8,000 people. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about how you got to the point where you built this community and what are you doing to keep that community engaged?
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned even when you used the earlier version of Immitracker, there was a forum then. So we discovered, I did a lot of product like research and work when I first took on this company. We completely revamped the platform and building it into a new thing. And what I learned then, the forum was a little bit of an older school approach. People like fast responses. And I saw that even if you go on like something like the Canada Visa forum, people will frequently link WhatsApp group links. So we started linking WhatsApp groups to the main tracker. So let's say you are applying for the Canadian Experience Class program. You go to the Canadian Experience Class tracker on ImmiTracker, you'll see a button for the WhatsApp group. You click on it. Every group in our community is moderated personally by me. I approve every person manually. I send the group rules. I remove anybody that's a spammer. People already know to tag me. And as a result of these efforts, we've grown this community to over 8,500 people since mid 2023. So in less than 2 years, we got here because we just let, and the wonderful thing about this is that it self moderates. These people know what conversations they should be having there. They're not going to try to have a conversation about a wonderful day in a group about Canadian experience class. They want to know, like, hey, where's your application at and is it stuck? So as long as you give them like their high level guidelines and moderate it on a high level and make sure that you remove the bad actors, the people just do a wonderful job themselves. And that's how we ended up with this massive community. And honestly, I get messages every single month from people being like, thank you for doing this. This has been a massive life changing experience for us that has kept us sane throughout this process.
That sounds like an intense amount of work to do as one individual to sort of monitor, all of these groups and keep an eye on it. So you're definitely doing an amazing job. And I think as an immigrant myself, I have found tremendous amount of value even in its former glory as a forum, which I can only imagine how much more helpful it is in a more modern format. Have you noticed any unexpected ways in which people are using Immitracker? Like something that you didn't think that this is what people would do, but they still find the use case?
Well, one thing that I found was interesting, it's not specifically Immitracker that they're using, but I saw the same community. There's an app called Countdown, which people just use for like writing down certain milestones. I was not expecting it, but my community is flooded with this countdown app. It's because people found a way to use this regular, like, alert timer app to build out a pretty version of their immigration timeline that they put like color code or they put icons on and they just share the screenshot of it in the community.
That's
I have
amazing.
yeah. Yeah, I would have never thought of that. And I at first I thought it was a competitor product, but then it was just the timer app, the countdown app. And
Mm.
then they just do different versions of it. And actually that's inspiring a lot of our product growth and development at Tracker because we are going to be introducing a mobile version as a result of the research that I saw, the research that I did in the community. We're going to introduce a mobile version that makes it easier for them to do the same thing on Tracker later this year. But that I got inspired for that because these people just used a completely different app for a completely different purpose. And you see things like this regularly.
That's amazing. I remember I did my Canadian immigration application in 2019, and I used to be in California back then. And somebody used to maintain this sort of a Google sheet where
Yep.
people would go upload when did they submit the application and update, like when do you get the next, the invitation
Yeah.
to apply or whatever, like all the stages in between. And people would keep a counter between days. And I would go keep checking that because I would want to know, like, okay, I haven't heard anything about my
Yeah.
application. Is it still within that window or not?
That
Um,
still exists. That's still, I would say, like, of all the things when people ask me what my biggest competitor is, I actually think those sheets are our biggest competitor. Because realistically, like what you get on Tracker and in those sheets is the same kind of data, except Tracker makes it 10 times easier to work with it and
right.
analyze it and add in your key. By the way, they don't allow you to add in your own data to the Google Sheet. Now you have to like individually message some admin so they see ads in your
Got
data
it.
because people kept screwing up the
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, let's talk a little bit about psychology because I feel like as immigrants, that is one topic that, it's harder to understand the challenges if you're not an immigrant yourself because you come to a new country with a lot of fear and baggage already. The fact that you don't
Yeah,
know anyone. When I came to Canada, I knew zero people. Like when
I
I had
feel you.
moved for the first time to the US, I at least knew a few people because like we went to school together or a friend of a friend or whatever. But for whatever reason, I just couldn't find anybody that I knew in Vancouver back then.
I
And
f-
yeah, and it can get stressful. You're trying to build a startup or, and you're trying to have a social life as well. I have spoken to my friends who moved from India, built startups, but eventually got so sort of secluded and almost depressed of not having a social life that they eventually decided to move back to India. And culturally, it's very different, right? Like being an Indian, we don't have boundary of physical space around us. We're like more than 1.5 billion people, right? So there's always people around. So there's always people in your house. It's rare to go by a few days and you've not met someone or
Yeah.
somebody's not come to your house, right? And then you come to this place and you're sort of alone. You have to build new relationships. You have to understand new cultural mindset. Now, for you moving to the US and then Canada, what have you done to sort of stay resilient? And you talked about a little bit that you had your own share of challenges and making
Mhm.
new friends and finding new people to meet with. What have you figured out something that works for you now that makes you feel better?
Great question. Yes. So the math that I do in my head on this is that it on average takes at least 4 to 6 months for you to begin feeling somewhat comfortable in a place. Like somewhat comfortable. I'm like the very bare minimum. Like even if you're very extroverted, even if you go to events, like yes, you can ramp up a bunch of random connections quickly, but starting to make those connections that are real, like friendships that might go somewhere, certain comfort with the layout of the land and so forth, 4 to 6 months. That's just been my experience of moving several times. And even when I moved to a place where I knew people, it still took me that long to begin feeling comfortable there. So that's first of all. Second of all, Vancouver, I completely understand. Vancouver is a harder city to ramp up in. I had the same exact issue as you there. I felt that slightly less in Toronto, by the way, but that's because Toronto is a bigger city, more people move in and out all the time. So there's more flexibility to join certain friendships opposed to Vancouver, where things are a little bit more closed off and more about who you know. So the culture of the city or the location you move to also matters. That being said, the system that I have put in place is that you just have to you have to keep putting yourself out there. Like, don't get overly attached to the initial experiences, to the first friendships. Like, I cycled through several friend groups ever since I moved to Toronto before I started more or less settling on the people that I kept around. And just going to events or certain activities, like maybe workouts or community events or whatever it is, where you can find like-minded people and just doing it regularly without high expectations of I have to make a friend every single time I go is the way to go. And let it take its time. Like, let it flow. Like, don't rush it. Don't be hard on yourself. I feel like a lot of immigrants do this. Probably the same
Yeah.
thing happened to your friends. Like, within 3 months, if they haven't really met anybody, oh, I'm never going to find anybody here. This is not my place. For most people, they can always go back home and you can always go back to what is known and comfortable for you. But again, did you immigrate for the known and comfortable, or did you immigrate for a new experience to challenge yourself, to try something new? This is part of the challenge. And I would treat it as such.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it sort of reminded me of a few things that I used to do as well. In the beginning, again, you try to stay in your comfort groups, right, or your comfort zone
Mhm.
areas. I used to go to a lot of startup events, and then I
Same.
got exhausted of doing that. And I realized, like, okay, I don't want to meet more tech
Startup
founders right
bros.
now. I want to meet some other people. And that's when I started going to like the randomest of things like coffee meetups. There is a running group in the morning where we you do a short run and then you have coffee and you chat and get to know people. There is a book club, a yoga group, bussing on the street or whatever, like joining a choir, whatever it is, right? So many things you could do
Exactly.
where you can build a diverse network. And I really liked one thing that you said is don't get attached to the circles that you create almost immediately. Over
Yeah,
time, you'll realize who are the more longer term friends
exactly.
and relationships you will build. But, just being more open to that idea is definitely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, this comes from a lot of personal experience, right? Like I've learned that like most of the circles that I would meet and like form within the first like 6 months of me being somewhere, most of the time, a lot of those people would end up going away later because it's
Yeah.
just you move in different directions, right? These are the people that you met and you grabbed onto because you really needed something at a certain time. But what you really need once you truly mature in a location, and by the way, that takes at least 2 years in my opinion, like, if you're in a place for 2 years or more, that's when you really start putting down your roots there. Then you realize that what you meant then doesn't actually meet your needs longer term. And that's like, be flexible with the process, allow yourself to meet new people, don't get bogged down, don't get mad at yourself for not immediately meeting the people that you want, and just be open to the change. All I'm saying.
That's amazing. So, Nino, tell me this, right? Your Immitracker also has, it's fairly mission driven. It's solving a major pain point, but it's also sort of, you're really helping people figure out their move to a new country. And so there's a fair amount of mission behind that. Do you ever feel torn between sort of serving the mission and scaling the business? Like you could find numerous ways to make more money or scale it up, but there's also the mission component to it. Do you ever feel torn between those decisions?
Absolutely. I mean, I think any founder of a consumer startup has felt this at some point because yes, you love your users. Yes, you want to help them. Yes, you want to keep delivering the service. But at the end of the day, a business is a business, right? And this is what makes building a consumer business in a non-consumer time very difficult because before businesses could get away with like raising several rounds of money without having to deal with this. But now you have to deal with it in the earlier stages. And this is a learning experience that I had to go through for the first year and a half of Immitracker of realizing, yes, the mission is there. I care about my users. I want to give to them as much as possible for free. But this is a business and I need to find a way to scale it. So since mid last year, we've been finding alternative ways to generate revenue and focus on different market segments for revenue generation because the reality is that it is a business that needs to scale. And we do want to keep the core proposition value prop of Tracker always free and available for our users. So we're trying other ways of building the product in a different direction as a result.
That's amazing. As we get closer to the end of this session, I want to ask you a couple of more things. If you were to launch or build any tracker today, are there some things you would do differently?
Oh, good question. Very good question. I think what I would do differently is that I would start it as a B2B product with a community for the B2C component. And then I would distill the B2B product into a consumer product afterwards, rather than doing it the other way around. Because starting off as consumer and then building into B2B, I have a big audience and the user base basically that I still need to serve while also working towards putting out a B2B version of the product to generate more revenue and scale. And that makes it very difficult because, as you already mentioned, the consumer focus is a lot of work. But then if you had started with B2B and worked through a few business clients, like had an enterprise version going, started to generate revenue, creating a subsidiary version of that product for the consumer, which you see actually a lot of the big brands do, would be significantly easier in my opinion. So I would have just changed that
Got
approach.
it. Last thing, what is your advice to some of the immigrant founders that are listening to this show who are trying to break into the tech ecosystem in North America? It could be US or Canada. What's some advice you would give to new immigrant founders?
Honestly, you get started. You don't have to have a perfect plan. Well, let's kind of like recap this a little bit. Yes, just get started, but don't just drop everything and be like, that's it, I'm a founder today. I'm walking into this and do like have a plan. Because as an immigrant, you have slightly more consideration to make than as a local person. Like for example, I've seen plenty of my friends that are Canadian that would like move in with their parents, live in the basement, work out of the garage, whatever. Most of the time as immigrants, you don't have that option. You either have a family back home that you're supporting, or maybe you took on a mortgage that you're paying for yourself, or maybe you have a family that you need to support and you don't have parents to support you here. Like there's a lot of considerations financially that you need to be making as an immigrant. So keep that in mind as you go into this and have a plan. But I would potentially start as a part-time thing, as a bootstrap engagement, see how it goes. Definitely go for it, definitely explore. And if you see the traction, if you see the interest, if you think that you have it in you and you can go there down this direction, then by all means, the world is your oyster.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that advice, Nino. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you for taking out time and sharing your experience and your journey. I'm sure this is very, very helpful to everybody listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that wraps up today's episode. Before we sign off, I would like to thank you for your support and thanks for tuning in. If you loved today's episode, then don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Be kind, be happy. challenge the norm. I'll see you folks again for the next one.